I am writing this down because my therapist told me that externalizing trauma helps. She said to write it like a report, clinical and detached, the way I used to write my field notes for the Forest Service. I tried 3 times before this. Each time I reached the part where it spoke to me, where I heard my own voice coming back at me from somewhere inside the dark tree line, I closed the notebook and put it away. The 3rd attempt I shoved under the kitchen sink behind the cleaning supplies so my wife would not find it. She found the 2nd one. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I came downstairs, hands flat on the wood, not moving, the way animals go still when they smell something wrong on the wind. She did not ask me a lot of questions. She just said, "Are you okay?" and I said no. She said, "Do you want to move away from here?" and I said yes. We put the house on the market the following week, and were gone inside a month. I am writing this now because I am sitting in a rented apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, 412 miles from those mountains, and I still wake up at 3 in the morning with the taste of cold creek water and pine resin coating the back of my throat. I still hear it in the half-second between sleeping and waking. My own voice. Saying my name. Not the way I say it. Not the way anyone who loves me says it. Something that learned the sound of me and played it back wrong, like a recording made on broken equipment, like a human voice reconstructed from memory by something that had never actually been human. I want people to know what is in those mountains. Not the bears. Not the coyotes. Not even the things the old-timers whisper about after their 3rd whiskey. Something older than all of those stories. Something that has been there longer than the people who named those hills, longer than the people who came before them, longer possibly than the hills themselves. I need people to know that it listens. And that once it knows your name, it does not forget. I had been a Forest Service field inspector for 11 years when they sent me into the Monongahela National Forest section near the Greenbrier River Trail in early October of 2009. My job was routine, or what passes for routine in that line of work. There had been reports from a hiking group out of Charleston about unusual animal activity in a 4-mile stretch of backcountry between 2 fire roads. Specifically, deer carcasses found in trees. Not on the ground. In the trees, wedged between branches 10 and 15 feet up, with no tracks beneath them, no signs of predator drag, no logical explanation for how they got there. The group that reported it was 6 college kids doing a long weekend wilderness trip. I read their statements before I went out. The writing was scattered, the kind of prose you produce when you are frightened and trying to sound calm and rational. One of the girls, a sophomore from Morgantown named Jessie Burwell, had written her account in pencil on the back of a trail map because she did not have paper, and the handwriting got smaller and tighter as it went on, like she was trying to compress herself, trying to take up less space on the page. Her statement was the only one that mentioned the sounds. She wrote, "The second night we heard something calling from the trees on the north side of camp. It sounded at first like a person calling for help, like someone lost. Danny thought it was another hiker. He started to get up and Kyle grabbed his arm. Then it changed. It started sounding like it was trying out different voices. Like it was cycling through them. First a man, then a woman, then a child. All of them saying different things but none of it making complete sense, like words from a language you almost know. We did not sleep that night. It called from the trees until about 4 in the morning and then it stopped all at once. No one in the group went to investigate. The deer in the trees was strange enough to warrant a look. The statement from Jessie Burwell I wrote off as scared kids with overactive imaginations. I drove up to the trailhead on a Wednesday morning in the first week of October, the mountains showing their fall colors, the kind of vivid amber and crimson display that makes that part of West Virginia look like a painting of itself. The air was cold and clean. The sky was the deep, unambiguous blue you only get at elevation in autumn. I had my pack, my field notebook, my radio, my GPS unit, and my service-issue sidearm, which I almost never use for anything except occasionally dispatching badly injured animals. I planned to be in and out in 2 days. Find the carcasses, document them, collect samples, try to determine the cause, and file my report. I had done this kind of assignment dozens of times. I signed the trail register at the trailhead. I noted the time, 8:47 in the morning. I noted the weather clear, 44 degrees Fahrenheit, wind from the northwest at roughly 5 miles per hour. I started down the trail. The first 4 miles were unremarkable. The trail follows the Greenbrier River for a stretch, crosses a wooden footbridge, and then climbs into older forest, big hemlocks and yellow birches, the kind of trees that have been there for 200 years and intend to be there for 200 more. The understory was thin at that time of year, the ferns gone brown, the wildflowers long finished. You could see deep into the woods on both sides of the trail, which I always found reassuring. Dense undergrowth makes me nervous. Too many things can be close to you without your knowing. I found the first carcass at mile marker 6. It was a doe, maybe 110 pounds, wedged horizontally between two branches of a yellow birch about 12 feet off the ground. It had been there long enough to be well into decomposition. I guessed at least 10 days based on the state of it, and the smell reached me before I saw it, that thick copper and rot smell that I had long since learned to recognize as large animal death. I stopped beneath the tree and looked up at it for a long time. There are no predators in West Virginia that cache kills in trees. Mountain lions do this, but confirmed mountain lion sightings in the state are exceedingly rare, and mountain lions cache their kills in the branches close to the trunk, not wedged between mid-branch fork points. This deer looked like it had been placed. Arranged, almost. The legs were positioned in a way that seemed deliberate, too extended, too folded, and the head was turned to one side at an angle that would have been impossible in life without a broken neck. I took photographs. I collected samples. I noted the absence of tracks beneath the tree. The soil was soft enough after recent rain that anything heavy enough to hoist a deer 12 feet into a tree should have left significant impressions. There was nothing. Not even disturbed leaf litter. I moved on and found 2 more carcasses over the next mile, both deer, both in trees, both in advanced decomposition, both showing the same deliberate arrangement of limbs, the same unnatural positioning of the head. The second one had the additional detail of having its ribcage opened, the organs removed with what appeared to be surgical precision, no tearing, no ragged edges, just clean separation, and the ribs themselves bent slightly outward, like hands opening. I sat on a log near the third carcass and ate my lunch and tried to think rationally. My radio was getting intermittent reception this deep in the hollow, which was normal. My GPS was functioning fine. The afternoon was still clear, the light slanting gold through the trees at the angle it takes in October when the sun is starting its decline. I had about 3 hours of good daylight left. I wrote in my field notebook, 3 confirmed carcasses, all white-tailed deer, all female, all placed in tree canopy at heights of 10 to 15 feet, no tracks, no predator sign, no logical mechanism of placement. Condition and decomp stage suggests kills occurred 8 to 14 days prior. Investigating further, plan to camp at the designated site near the second fire road junction approximately 1.5 miles ahead. Then I put the notebook away, shouldered my pack, and kept walking. I heard the first sound at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. It was behind me on the trail, maybe 50 yards back, a single sharp crack, like a branch breaking underfoot. I stopped and turned. The trail was empty as far as I could see in both directions, which in that section was about 40 yards before the curve of the slope took it out of sight. I stood still and listened. The woods were quiet in the way deep woods go quiet when something moves through them, not the comfortable ambient silence of an undisturbed forest, but the held-breath silence of animals pausing their activity to watch something pass. I waited about 2 minutes. Nothing moved. Nothing cracked again. I turned and kept walking. The second sound came 20 minutes later, from off the trail to my left, in the trees downslope toward the creek I could hear but not see. This time it was not a crack. It was a low, rhythmic knocking, wood on wood, 3 beats spaced evenly, then a pause, then 3 beats again. I had heard this before. Black bears do it, a territorial behavior, knocking on trees with their forepaws. The spacing and rhythm matched. I made a note of it, and kept my hand near my sidearm and kept walking. The third sound I am not going to explain away. I was maybe a quarter-mile from the campsite when I heard it, coming from the ridge above the trail to my right, through maybe 200 yards of mixed hardwood. A voice. A human voice. Male, middle-aged, clear and calm, saying a single word. My name. Not my title, not hey you, not any of the generic summoning sounds a person might make in the woods to flag down another hiker. My full first name, Mark, spoken in a tone of recognition, the tone you use when you see someone you know across a room. I stopped dead on the trail. Mark. I turned toward the ridge. The trees were dense up there, the light already going gray and thin under the canopy. I could see maybe 30 yards into the forest before it became shadow. Hello, I called. Who is up there? Silence. Forest Service, I called. Are you in distress? Do you need assistance? Nothing. I stood there for a long moment, running through rational explanations. Sound carries strangely in mountain terrain. Another hiker on the ridge, maybe calling to a friend with the same name. An echo I had misidentified. The wind through the branches producing something that sounded like a word. None of these explanations felt adequate. The voice had been clear. There had been no ambient noise to confuse it, no wind at that moment. It had said my name, not a generic syllable that resembled my name, but my actual name, with the emphasis I put on it myself, the slight flatness of my Midwestern-born vowel. I checked my radio. Intermittent signal, as before. I tried to raise the district office and got static. I kept walking and reached the campsite before full dark. Set up my tent, made my dinner, sat by a small fire. The woods around the site were quiet. I told myself, another hiker who had somehow seen my name tag on a previous section of trail. Some kind of auditory trick in the terrain. A coincidence. I am a practical man. 11 years in the field. I have encountered bears at close range and dealt with them calmly. I once helped carry an injured hiker 4 miles out on an improvised stretcher in a thunderstorm. I do not panic easily, and I do not have a particular susceptibility to the supernatural. I believe in what I can measure and observe and document. I went to sleep at around 9 o'clock. I woke at 2:17 in the morning. I know the time because I looked at my watch immediately after I came awake, a habit from years of early morning starts in the field. I was fully awake, not groggily surfacing from a dream but snapping awake all at once, the way your body wakes you when it has detected something before your conscious mind caught up. I lay still in my sleeping bag for a moment, listening. The fire had gone to coals. Through the mesh of my tent door I could see the faint red glow of them. The woods around the site were dark and absolutely still. Then it spoke. It came from the tree line on the north side of the clearing, maybe 30 feet from my tent. My voice. Not a voice like mine. Not a voice that resembled mine in pitch or quality. My voice. The exact resonance of my own vocal cords, the specific timbre that I hear when I listen to recordings of myself and wince at the slight Midwestern flatness of my long vowels, the way I drop my G's at the end of words when I am speaking casually. All of that. Reproduced with a fidelity that was grotesque in its precision. It said, "Mark, come out here, Mark. I want to show you something." I did not move. It said, "It is cold out here, Mark, come on out." My voice. My exact voice. The phrasing I would use. The rhythm and cadence of my speech. But the content was wrong. I would never say those words in that sequence. There was something slightly off about the construction, like a sentence assembled by someone who had studied the components of my speech but not fully grasped the connective logic. The way a person who is fluent in a language but not native to it sometimes produces sentences that are grammatically correct but carry a faint uncanny wrongness in their idiom. I reached for my sidearm. My hand was shaking. I am not ashamed to say that. My hand was shaking quite badly. "Mark." The voice again. A pause. "Mark, come out here." "I am right here, Mark. I want to tell you that I did something heroic. That I stepped out of the tent and confronted it, and documented it, and reported it back through the proper channels of the Forest Service with photographs and soil samples and a complete scientific accounting. What I actually did was lie absolutely still in my sleeping bag for approximately 4 hours, with my sidearm gripped in both hands pointing at the tent door, while the voice outside cycled through variations on my name. Sometimes it spoke in my voice. Sometimes, and this was worse, so much worse, it spoke in voices I recognized. My wife's voice. My brother's voice. My father's voice, and my father has been dead for 6 years. Each voice saying my name, sometimes with other words attached, sometimes just the name alone, over and over, with the patient persistence of something that does not experience fatigue or boredom or doubt. At 4:43 in the morning by my watch, it stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever experienced. I lay there until it was light enough to see clearly. Then I packed my tent. I left everything except my pack and my notebook, and my radio, and my sidearm. I left my cooking equipment. I left my food bag. I walked out of those woods at a pace that was not quite a run but was not anything a casual observer would have called a walk, and I reached the trailhead at 9:20 in the morning, and I sat in my truck with the doors locked and the engine running for 20 minutes before I felt safe enough to shift into drive. I filed an incident report with the district office. I described the carcasses. I did not describe the voice. I said I had completed my survey of the reported anomalies and recommended further investigation by a team rather than a solo inspector. My supervisor, a practical no-nonsense woman named Cheryl Danforth who had been with the service for 20 years, looked at my face when I came in to file the report and did not ask questions, which is one of the things I will always appreciate about her. She assigned a 2-person team to follow up. Both of them came back in one day instead of the planned 2. Neither of them would tell me specifically why. One of them, a young man named Torres who had been with us for about 18 months, gave his notice the following week. Cheryl told me he had cited personal reasons. I tried to research the area on my own time, in the evenings, online and at the county library. What I found was not reassuring. The stretch of Monongahela backcountry where I had been assigned sits on land that was never formally settled. The surrounding area has homesteads going back to the early 1800s, the usual Scots-Irish and German families who pushed into the Appalachian Highlands after the Revolution. But that particular hollow, that specific 4 or 5 mile stretch of forest between the fire roads, nothing. No land grants, no homestead records, no church records of anyone living there. The land appears in the county records simply as unclaimed forest from the earliest documentation forward. One of the local historians at the county library, an older gentleman named Earl Prater who had been studying Pocahontas County history for 30 years, told me something when I described the general area I was asking about. He went quiet for a moment and then said, "You are talking about the Garnet Hollow stretch." I said I did not know the local name for it. He said, "That is what the old families call it. Garnet Hollow. Nobody has ever lived there. Nobody goes back in there to hunt, or trap, or cut timber." I asked why not. He looked at me over his reading glasses for a moment. Then he said, "Because things go in there and come back wrong." He pressed his hands together on the library table and told me what the old families believed. He said there is something in those mountains that collects things. Voices, he said. Sounds. The way a crow collects shiny objects, no one knows exactly why, no one knows what it does with them. He said the old people used to say that if you went into Garnet Hollow and it called to you and you answered, it took your voice. Not metaphorically. It took the actual sound of you, your specific individual acoustic signature, and kept it. And then it used that voice to call to the next person. And the next. He said that is why you never answer when something calls your name in the deep woods. Not because it is rude to ignore it. Because if you answer, it has taken something from you that you cannot get back. I asked him how old that belief was. He thought about it. Older than the white settlers, he said. It is in the Cherokee accounts. The Shawnee accounts. Every group of people who ever moved through those mountains had a story about the thing in the hollow that calls to you in the voices of people you know. Different names for it, but the same story. Same rules. I asked what happened to people who went toward it when it called. He took his glasses off and polished them on his shirt and said, Well, some of them just got lost and died of exposure, probably. But some of them, they came out after days or weeks and they were not right anymore. They did not speak normally. They sort of borrowed voices. Could not maintain their own. The old families called it being hollow-touched. Said the thing had taken enough of them that there was not enough person left to fill the space. I left the library and sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I thought about the voice calling in my voice from the tree line. I thought about the moment on the trail when I had heard my own name spoken back to me from the ridge. I had not responded to the call on the trail. I had called out hello in Forest Service, not my name, not a confirmation that the voice was speaking to the right person. But at the campsite, lying still with my gun pointed at the door, I had not said anything at all. I had not answered. I had not confirmed. I had just listened. I wonder sometimes if listening was enough. When it spoke to me in my father's voice, my father who has been dead for 6 years, who died of a heart attack in a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, whose voice I have not heard anywhere except in my own memory since then, when it said my name in my dead father's voice, I almost got out of the tent. I want you to understand that. I almost got up. The pull of it was enormous. My rational mind knew what was happening. My rational mind was aware that my father was dead and that what was calling from the tree line was not my father. But the voice was his voice. The inflection was his. The way he drew out the vowel in my name, slightly longer than average, slightly more deliberate, the way he said my name when he was being serious with me, when he was about to say something important, all of it reproduced, exact, terrible. I pressed my face into the sleeping bag and held my gun and did not move and did not answer. I believe that if I had answered, if I had said Dad into the darkness of my tent, if I had so much as let my voice out into that clearing, something would have come through the door. Not my father. Not anything that looked like my father, or that had any connection to my father other than having stolen his voice from someone who encountered it. Something old. Something patient. Something that had been sitting in the dark of that hollow, building its collection, voice by voice, for longer than any human record stretches. 3 months after the incident, in January of 2010, my wife's mother was hospitalized in Lewisburg, which is about 40 miles from the section of Monongahela where I had been assigned. We drove up to see her. I did not go near Pocahontas County. I did not go near Garnet Hollow. We stayed in a motel in Lewisburg, visited the hospital, had dinner with my wife's family, drove back to Raleigh. On the second night of the trip, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, I woke in our motel room to a sound from outside the window. We were on the second floor. Outside the window was a parking lot and beyond it a wood line, second-growth hardwood, thin and unremarkable, the kind of scrub forest that grows up on the edges of developed land throughout West Virginia. My wife's voice. Not from the bed beside me, where she was asleep. From outside the window. From the tree line. My wife's voice saying my name. Her exact voice, not her voice in distress, not a scream or a cry, but her voice the way she uses it in ordinary moments, in the kitchen in the morning, in the easy shorthand of long intimacy. Saying my name the way she says it when she is about to ask me something, the slight upward inflection she uses, the familiarity of it. I lay in the dark and I did not move and I did not answer and I stared at the ceiling until morning. We were 40 miles from Garnet Hollow. 40 miles? My wife's voice. I tried to call Earl Prater at the county library to ask him some follow-up questions. The librarian who answered the phone told me that Earl Prater retired in September and had moved away. She did not know where. I asked if he had left a forwarding address and she said no. He had just packed up and gone, very suddenly, without telling anyone where he was headed. I found that interesting in a way that made me not want to think about it too hard. There is one final detail I have not mentioned until now because I am not sure how to contextualize it. When I got back to the district office on that Wednesday morning in October, I submitted my gear for routine cleaning and maintenance as required by service protocol. The cleaning crew noted that my voice recorder, the small digital recorder I used to dictate field notes, which I had been using throughout the previous day, had an anomaly. The recording I had made on the trail that day was intact. My voice documenting the carcasses, my voice noting the auditory event at 1545 hours, my voice making ordinary observations about weather and terrain. But there was additional audio on the recorder. After my last entry, made at approximately 5:30 in the afternoon when I reached the campsite, after that, the recorder had continued running all night, apparently, though I had not activated it. The night audio was mostly ambient, wind, the creek, the natural sounds of the forest at night. But the cleaning crew member who flagged the anomaly, a young woman named Patricia who I will always remember for the look on her face when she told me this, said that at 2:23 in the morning there was a period of approximately 4 minutes of clear audio. 4 minutes of my voice. Not calling a name. Not saying words exactly. Making sounds. As if it was testing the voice. Running through its range. Exploring its capacity. The way a musician plays scales before a performance, methodical, unhurried, not for an audience, just for the purpose of being sure the instrument is ready. Patricia asked me if I wanted to listen to it. I told her to delete it. She did. I have been grateful for that decision every day since. I am finishing this account on the evening of November 14th, 2009. My wife is in the next room watching television. The apartment is well lit, and the windows are closed, and I can hear traffic on the street outside and the neighbor's dog and a television laugh track. I do not know what the thing in Garnet Hollow is. I do not know what category of reality it occupies. I am not a spiritual man, and I am not a superstitious man, and I am deeply uncomfortable with language that cannot be grounded in observable fact. But I have been trying for months to construct an explanation for what I experienced that does not require me to accept the existence of something that is not explicable by any framework I was given for understanding the world, and I have failed every time. There is something in the Monongahela backcountry near Garnet Hollow. It has been there for a very long time. It collects voices, the sounds that individual human beings make, their specific individual acoustic signatures, and it stores them, and it uses them to call, to draw people toward it. It is patient. It does not tire. It does not give up. And I believe it followed me, 40 miles from its territory, into a motel parking lot in January, in the dark, calling in my wife's voice from a tree line outside a second-floor window. I do not know why it let me leave that campsite that morning. I do not know what would have happened if I had answered. I think about that sometimes. Usually at 3 in the morning, when I wake up and lie still and listen, and the city is quiet and the traffic is gone and there is just the dark and my own breathing. I think about what would have come through the door. I think it would have been wearing my voice the way you wear a coat. And somewhere in a hollow in the mountains of West Virginia, it still has my voice. It still has my father's voice. It has voices going back centuries, every person who ever walked into those trees and came out a little emptier than they went in. And it is patient. It does not forget. And it is always, always listening. Before we dive into the next story, have you ever heard strange sounds in the woods? A mysterious whistle, calls that didn't sound right? Share your story in the comments. It might be featured in the next episode. Subscribe now and hit the bell. We're just steps away from 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you helps keep these stories alive. Now, get ready for the next chilling tale. My name is Carol Hensley, and I am writing this in the kitchen of my sister's house in Lexington, Kentucky, because I no longer have a house of my own. The house I had is still standing. I drove past it 3 months ago, just once, just to see it from the road, and the porch light was on. It is always on now. The family that bought it from us moved out after 11 days. The family after them lasted a week. The house has been empty for going on 2 years, and the porch light is always on, and nobody knows why, because the power was shut off 14 months ago, and the utility company has confirmed this in writing, and still every night without fail the porch light burns steady and yellow at the end of that gravel driveway, and I do not go back there, and I do not let my children go back there, and I am writing this down because my oldest daughter is 17, and she has started asking questions, and she deserves to know what happened in that house, what happened to our family in the 14 months we lived there, what it was that stood in the tree line at the edge of our property every night from November through the following January, and called to my children in my voice. We moved to Harlan County from Lexington in the spring. My husband Dale had taken a job managing a small equipment operation near Cumberland, and the cost of living out there was a fraction of what we were paying in the city. We had 3 kids, Brianna who was 15, Tyler who was 11, and Sophie who had just turned 6. The house was a 2-story farmhouse, built in the 1940s, sitting on about 4 acres at the end of a gravel road off the main county road. There was a barn that we did not use, a creek at the back of the property, and a dense tree line of old-growth hardwood that bordered the back and west sides of the land. The realtor called it private and secluded. She was not wrong. The nearest neighbor was 3/4 of a mile up the main road. The town of Cumberland was 12 miles away. On clear nights you could stand on the back porch and see more stars than most people see in a lifetime. The first months were good. Better than good. Dale was happier than he had been in years, less stressed, sleeping through the night, laughing more. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Tyler loved the creek and spent every afternoon there until dark. Sophie found a box turtle in the garden and named it Gerald and kept it in a plastic storage bin in the garage until Dale convinced her it was happier outside. Brianna was the hardest transition, because she was 15 and had left her friends and her school behind, but even she came around by midsummer, started spending time on the porch with a book, started looking less like a person serving a sentence, and more like a person who had found something unexpectedly decent in a place she had not chosen. I want to say this clearly because I want you to understand what we had before it started. We were a happy family in a good place. What happened to us did not happen because we were broken or troubled or prone to hysteria. It happened because something in those woods decided to take an interest in us, and once that kind of thing takes an interest in you, happiness is not a protection. The first sign was the birds. In late September, about 4 months after we moved in, the birds stopped coming to the feeders I had put up along the back fence. Not gradually. One morning they were there as usual, chickadees and nuthatches and the occasional woodpecker working the big oak at the fence line, and the next morning nothing. The feeders were full. The birds were simply gone. I noticed it and thought nothing of it. I refilled the feeders anyway. Days went by. Nothing came. I mentioned it to Dale, and he shrugged and said maybe a hawk had moved into the area and spooked them. I thought that was probably right. Then the dogs stopped going to the back of the property. We had a 4-year-old shepherd mix named Hector who had always been fearless, who had once cornered a raccoon twice his size without hesitation. Hector stopped going past the midpoint of the backyard sometime in early October. He would trot out with you, happy and easy, and then at a certain point, maybe 60 feet from the back porch, he would stop. Plant all 4 feet. Lower his head. The fur along his spine would go up in a ridge from his shoulders to his tail. He would not growl. He would not bark. He would just stand there with his hackles up, staring at the tree line, and refuse to go further. You could coax him, call him, he would not move. Eventually he would back up, slowly, facing the trees the whole time, and then turn and trot back to the porch and sit there with his ears flat. I noticed this and I thought about it more than I thought about the birds. Hector had never shown fear behavior before. Not once in 4 years. Dogs do not invent reasons to be afraid of things. They detect. That is what they are built to do. But I told myself it was probably a predator scent, a coyote denning somewhere in the trees, something Hector could smell that we could not. I told myself that because the alternative was to take seriously the possibility that there was something in those woods that my dog could detect and I could not, and I was not ready to do that in October with the leaves turning and the weather still warm and everything in our life feeling good and new and chosen. The first night it called was November 3rd. I know the date because it was the night after the time change, and I had been awake already thinking about how strange it felt to have darkness coming so early now, how the evenings had compressed into something tight and close. Dale was asleep beside me. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I heard Sophie's voice from somewhere outside the house, small and clear in the night air, saying, "Mama, Mama, come out here, Mama, I found something." I was out of bed before I was fully awake. That is what a mother does. You hear your child's voice and your body moves before your mind engages. I was in the hallway and had my hand on Sophie's door before I thought to pause, and I paused because something was wrong with the voice, something I had not consciously identified yet but that my body had registered, some quality of it that made me stop with my hand on the doorknob in the dark hallway. Then I opened the door and Sophie was in her bed, asleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit with her mouth slightly open, breathing the slow, deep breath of a child in deep sleep. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. From outside, from the direction of the backyard, I heard it again. "Mama! Mama, come out here. I found something pretty." Sophie's exact voice. The exact pitch of it, the exact rhythm, the word pretty with the emphasis Sophie puts on the first syllable, the way she has said it since she learned to talk. I stood in my daughter's doorway and listened to my daughter's voice coming from the darkness outside my daughter's window, and I did not move and I did not make a sound. After a while it stopped. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. In the morning I told myself what I had wanted to tell myself the night before, a dream, a half-awake confusion, the brain pulling familiar sounds from ambient noise. I did not tell Dale. I told myself there was nothing to tell. It came back the next night. And the night after that. Not every night at first, but often enough to establish a pattern, often enough that by the end of November I was waking at 1:30 in the morning as reliably as if I had set an alarm, lying in the dark listening, waiting for it to begin. It always came from the back of the property, from somewhere near the tree line. It always used the children's voices. Sophie most often, because Sophie was 6 and her voice was the smallest, and the most immediately alarming, the most likely to produce a response. But it used Tyler's voice too, and once, in early December, it used Brianna's voice, and something about hearing my 15-year-old's voice coming from the darkness at 2 in the morning was worse than all the other nights combined because Brianna's voice had more complexity to it, more specific personality, and hearing it reproduced that way, that exact teenage flatness she uses when she is trying to sound unimpressed. Used as bait, was nauseating in a way I do not have adequate words for. I told Dale in the first week of December. I had held it for a month and I could not hold it any more. He did not believe me initially, not completely, which I understood. He is a practical man and I was telling him something that did not fit into any practical framework he had. He said it was probably an animal, that some animals, foxes especially, could produce sounds that resembled human voices and that in the dark and from a distance it was easy to misidentify them. I said I knew what my children's voices sounded like. He said of course, but the brain fills in details. I said I was not filling in anything. He said let us see if it happens again. It happened again that night. He heard it. He heard Sophie's voice, clear and sweet from the back of the property, saying, "Daddy, Daddy, come out here. There is something in the creek. Daddy, come see." I was watching his face in the dark. I watched it change. I watched the practical explanation evaporate, and something older and less articulate take its place. He got up and went to the window and looked out at the backyard and the dark line of trees at the back of the property, and the beam of the porch light reaching partway into the yard and stopping where the darkness began. He stood there for a long time. The voice called twice more and then stopped. He came back to bed and did not say the word fox. He did not say anything at all. We lay in the dark side by side and listened to the silence, and in the morning we began talking about what to do. We went through a period of practical responses. Dale bought a trail camera and set it up facing the back tree line. For 11 nights it captured nothing, just darkness, just the faint movement of branches in the wind. On the 12th night it captured a shape at the tree line, barely visible at the edge of the camera's infrared range, large, bipedal, standing still. The image quality was poor. The shape was indistinct. You could not say definitively what it was. But it was standing upright at the tree line at 1:47 in the morning on a December night in Harlan County, and it was not a bear, and it was not a deer, and its proportions were not right for anything Dale or I could name. Dale sent the image to two people, a hunting buddy who knew the local wildlife better than anyone he knew, and his brother who worked in wildlife biology. Both of them said they did not know what they were looking at. The hunting buddy said the proportions reminded him of something he had heard about from some of the old hunters in the county, but he did not say what. Dale pressed him, and he said he did not want to say it on a text message and changed the subject. The children began to hear it. That was what changed everything for me. I had been managing my own fear, compartmentalizing it the way parents do when they need to function. But in mid-December Tyler came downstairs one morning and said, "Mom, Sophie keeps calling me from outside at night, and it is annoying." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "She calls my name from the backyard at night. I can hear her from my room, and I know I am not supposed to go out after dark, but it sounds like she needs help." I looked at him and I said, "Tyler, Sophie is asleep when you hear that." He looked back at me and I watched him process what I was saying, watched the comfortable assumption of a normal explanation dissolve into something he did not have a category for. He was 11 years old, and I watched him become afraid in a slow, fundamental way, the way you become afraid when you realize that something you thought was solid and dependable has a crack running through it. I told him not to answer it. I sat with him at the kitchen table and I said, "If you hear that voice at night, do not open the window, do not call back, do not go outside." He asked me what it was. I said I did not know. He said, "Was it dangerous?" I said I thought it was best not to find out. He nodded very seriously in the way 11-year-old boys do when they are scared and trying to be brave, and he said, "Okay, Mom," and he went back upstairs, and I sat at the kitchen table alone and understood for the first time that we needed to leave. Dale did not want to leave. We had committed to the house, committed to the job, committed to the life we had chosen. He was not stupid or in denial. He had heard the voice himself, and he had seen the camera image, and he knew something was wrong. But he wanted to solve it, to address it, to approach it the way you approach a problem that has a solution. He called the county sheriff's office. The deputy who came out was a young man named Garrett, maybe 25, local-born, who listened politely and walked the back fence line with a flashlight and found nothing unusual and wrote up a report about potential trespassers or juveniles playing pranks. When he was leaving, he paused at his car and looked back at the house and said, "How long have you all been here?" I said, "About 7 months. He nodded slowly. He said, "You know this house has had a few owners over the years." I said I had gathered that. He said, "You might want to ask around about the property history." He said it in the way people say things when they want to tell you something but have decided it is not their place to say it. Then he got in his car and drove away. I asked around. It took some doing because people in Harlan County are not naturally forthcoming with strangers about local history, especially local history of the difficult variety. But I found an older woman named Darlene Combs who had lived in that county her entire life and who, when I described the property and the road, went very still in the way Earl Prater went still in the library with Mark Holloway, and said, "Honey, who sold you that house?" I told her. She shook her head slowly. She said that land has had trouble since before anyone living can remember. I asked what kind of trouble. She said, "The kind that uses your own people against you." She told me what she knew, which was a version of what Earl Prater told Mark Holloway, though she used different words and a different frame. She said the mountains in that part of Kentucky have something in them that the old families knew about and stayed away from. She said it particularly liked children, not in the way a predator likes prey, but in the way a collector likes rare objects. She said children's voices were the most effective bait it had found over its long experience with human beings, that a mother hearing her child's voice in the dark would do almost anything, overcome almost any rational restraint, and that this thing had learned this about human beings a very long time ago, and had been using it ever since. She said the people who went toward it when it called, who went out into the dark following a voice they loved, almost never came back the same. She said some of them did not come back at all. She said the ones who came back but were not the same, the hollow touch the old people called them, they had a particular quality. She said they would talk almost normally, but sometimes in the middle of a sentence they would briefly use a different voice, someone else's voice, and they would not seem to notice. She said she had known 2 people in her lifetime who had that quality, and one of them had been her uncle, who had gone out one night in 1974 following what he said was his daughter's voice and come back 3 days later from somewhere in the hills without any memory of where he had been or what he had done. She said after that he was never right. She said sometimes when he laughed it was not his laugh. We left the house in January. We did not sell it, not then, just locked it and left. Dale went back in March to collect the rest of our things, and he said the house felt different inside, not threatening exactly, but attentive, the way a room feels when there is someone else in it that you cannot see. He said the porch light was on when he arrived, and he was certain he had turned it off when we left. He collected what we needed and did not go back. The thing I think about most, the thing that stays with me in a way I cannot resolve, happened on our last full night in the house. I was up late packing boxes in the kitchen. Dale was asleep, the kids were asleep. It was about midnight, and the house was quiet. I heard it outside, Sophie's voice, "Mama, Mama, come out here." Ordinary night, ordinary call. I had heard it dozens of times by then. I did not go to the window. I kept packing boxes. Then it changed. The voice changed from Sophie's to something I had not heard it used before. My own voice. My own voice calling from the darkness at the back of the property, saying, come out here and see what I found, come out here, it is beautiful, I want to show you something beautiful." My own voice, with the specific quality of my own voice when I am excited about something, when I am calling to my family to come look at something wonderful. My voice used as bait, as lure, pointed not at my children but at me, the final escalation of something that had been working its way through my family for months and had now arrived at the source. I kept packing boxes. My hands were shaking. I kept packing. I did not go to the window. I did not answer. I packed boxes in my kitchen at midnight with my own voice calling to me from the darkness outside, and I did not go and I did not answer, and in the morning we loaded the car and we left, and we did not go back. The porch light is on. I drove past 14 months after we left, and the power has been disconnected for months, and the porch light is on. I think it is waiting. I think it is patient, the way it is always patient, the way it has been patient since before there were houses in these mountains or roads or people with electricity and porch lights. I think it learned our voices, all of us, Dale and me and the children, and it has them stored somewhere in whatever it is that it is, and it will use them again someday on someone else, will call the next family from the tree line in my voice and my children's voices, and those people will wake in the dark and hear something familiar and beloved calling them from outside, and they will not know what it is. They will not have been warned. They will not know to stay still and keep quiet and wait for morning. That is why I am writing this down. Not to explain it. Not to make anyone believe me. Just so the record exists. Just so that if something in those mountains uses my voice someday to call someone toward it in the dark, and they come toward it, and they are never the same after, at least there is something written down somewhere that says I did not give it my voice willingly. It took it from me while I slept in my own house, in my own life, in the middle of something I had built, and loved, and chosen. It took it without my knowledge and without my consent, and it has been mine for 41 years, and it is the most specifically mine thing that I have, the most individual, the most irreducible evidence of my existence, and something in the mountains of Harlan County, Kentucky is using it now for purposes I do not want to think about, and I want that known, and I want it written down. And I want someone to read this someday and stay away from the tree line after dark and not answer when they hear a voice they love calling from somewhere it should not be. Do not answer. No matter whose voice it uses. Do not answer. Wait for morning. Morning is the only safe thing. I have been on search and rescue in the North Carolina high country for 16 years, and I have found things in those mountains that I cannot account for, and I have written reports that do not contain everything I know, and I am writing this now because a member of my team, a young woman named Reina Vasquez who joined us 3 years ago, and who is one of the best field searchers I have ever worked with, told me last month that she sees it too and has been seeing it for 2 years and has not said anything because she did not want me to think she was losing her mind. I told her I had been seeing it for 11 years. We sat in my truck in the parking lot of the ranger station for a long time after that, not talking much, just sitting with the fact that we had both been carrying this alone and neither of us had needed to. I am going to describe it as plainly and accurately as I can. I am going to use the same standard I use when I write my incident reports: observable facts only, no interpretation, no embellishment, no effort to make the account more dramatic or more explicable than the reality. Here is what I have seen over 11 years of search and rescue operations in the Pisgah National Forest and the surrounding high country of western North Carolina. There is a figure. It stands on ridges. It stands at elevation, always above the search area, always at a distance that makes positive identification impossible, somewhere between 300 and 600 yards from our position depending on the terrain. It is bipedal and approximately human in overall shape, though the proportions are not quite right in ways that are difficult to specify. It is tall, taller than a normal adult human, in the range of 7 to 8 feet based on comparison with the tree line around it. It stands very still. It does not move while you are looking at it. The moment you look away and then look back, it is in a different position, sometimes only slightly different, sometimes dramatically so, but you never see it move. It is simply in one place and then, without transition, in another. It watches us work. The first time I saw it, I was on a search for a missing hiker on the Artlobe Trail in October of 2012. 42-year-old man from Charlotte, experienced hiker, last seen at the Black Balsam Knob trailhead. He had been missing for 36 hours when our team was deployed. It was late afternoon, the light going flat and gray under a cloud cover that was building toward rain, and I was working a grid pattern on a slope below the main ridge when I happened to look up at the ridgeline above me, maybe 400 yards away, because I thought I had heard something up there. A rock shifting, the sound of something large moving through the undergrowth, something like that. There was a figure standing on the ridge. My first thought was another hiker, which would have been the normal explanation. But I had been doing this long enough to look carefully before I assumed, and when I looked carefully I registered the things that were wrong. The figure was too tall. It was standing in a position that was oddly static, too perfectly still in the way that people are not still when they are standing on an uneven ridge in wind. And it was looking directly at us. I could not see its face at that distance. I am not going to claim I could see its eyes or any specific feature of it. But the orientation of its head, the angle of it, was pointed at our search team below with an attention that felt deliberate and focused and had nothing in it that resembled the casual curiosity of a passing hiker who had spotted a rescue operation. I radioed my team leader and said there was a figure on the ridge above us and asked if anyone had called in a sighting. He said no. I said I would check it out. I began moving upslope toward the ridge. It took me about 25 minutes to cover the distance and gain the elevation. When I reached the ridgeline, the figure was gone. There was no one there. I walked 100 yards in each direction along the ridge and found no sign of recent passage, no disturbed ground, no footprints in the soft earth near the trail. I radioed back that there was nothing up there and went back to the search. I thought about it that night after we found the missing hiker, dehydrated and disoriented but alive in a ravine off the main trail. I thought about the figure on the ridge and decided I had probably misidentified a dead tree stump at distance, the kind of mistake tired eyes make in fading light. I moved on. I saw it again 6 weeks later on a different search on a different mountain. Then again in the spring. Then twice the following fall. By the end of 2013 I had seen it 7 times on 7 different operations in different locations throughout the high country, always on a ridge above the search area, always in the same posture, always watching, and I had stopped explaining it as misidentified stumps or tired eyes because the pattern was too consistent and my eyes were not that tired. I began keeping a separate log. Not in my official records, just a personal notebook I kept in my truck. Date, location, operation, duration of sighting, approximate position of the figure relative to our team, any notable behavior. I have that notebook still. 43 entries over 11 years. 43 times on 43 separate operations I have observed the figure on the ridge. I have never seen it move. I have never seen it approach our team. I have never seen it interact with anything or anyone. It stands on ridges and it watches us work, and then it is gone. I want to describe a specific incident from the fall of 2016 because it is the clearest example of what I mean when I say the proportions are not quite right. We were searching for two missing children, siblings, 8 and 10 years old, who had gotten separated from their family on a trail in the Shining Rock Wilderness. It was the second day of the search and the weather had turned bad, cold rain coming in from the northwest, the kind of weather that makes a situation urgent. We had 6 team members working a grid pattern in a dense stretch of spruce fir forest at about 5,800 feet elevation. I was working the western edge of the grid, moving parallel to a rocky slope that rose steeply to a bare ridgeline about 500 yards above me. I looked up and it was there. The rain had reduced visibility, but the ridge was above the cloud ceiling, and I could see it clearly against the gray sky. It was standing between 2 large boulders at the crest of the ridge, and because the boulders were of a known type that I am familiar with in that area, I had a reference point for scale. The figure was approximately 7.5 feet tall based on that reference. Its arms were too long. That is what I registered most clearly that day, maybe because the light was better than usual, maybe because the distance was slightly less than average. The arms hung at its sides and they were too long, the hands reaching to mid-thigh level where on a human being of that height they would reach only to the upper thigh. And the head was too large. Not grotesquely so, not in the way of a caricature, but measurably so, the cranial volume noticeably greater than proportional for the body. These were not dramatic distortions. They were subtle enough that at a casual glance you would look at this figure and think, tall person on a ridge. But at careful observation something registered as wrong, the way a very good forgery registers as wrong to an expert who cannot immediately say what gives it away. It was looking at me. I knew it was looking at me specifically, not at the search team generally but at me, because all the other team members were in the forest to my east, and I was alone on the western edge of the grid, and there was no one else for it to be looking at. I stood still in the rain and looked back at it for approximately 90 seconds. It did not move. I looked away to check my GPS, a glance that took maybe 3 seconds, and when I looked back it was gone. We found the children 4 hours later, cold and wet but unharmed, sheltering under a rock overhang about a quarter mile from where they had left the trail. During the extraction I looked up at the ridge 3 times. It was not there. I have noticed over the years that it is only present during active searches. I have been on maintenance operations, trail work, controlled burns, routine inspections, dozens of trips into those same mountains outside the context of a search, and I have never seen it. It appears specifically when we are looking for someone. I have thought about what this means and I have not reached a conclusion that satisfies me. The most benign interpretation is that it is curious, that something about search activity draws its attention, that it comes to observe the way a crow comes to observe unusual human activity. A less benign interpretation is that it has an interest in the missing, in the lost, in the people we are looking for, and it comes to observe our searches for reasons related to that interest. I try not to think too hard about the less benign interpretation because I have to keep doing this work and I need to be able to function while I do it. In 2018 I had a conversation with an older rescue veteran named Pete Sorrells who had been doing this work in western North Carolina for over 30 years and had recently retired. I met him at a training event, and we ended up talking for a long time after, and at some point, after enough beer, I told him about the figure on the ridge. I watched his face carefully. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for someone to bring up a particular subject. He said, tall? Long arms. On ridges above the search area. I said yes. He said, watching? I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we called it the overseer. Not officially, not in any report. Just among the old-timers on the team. He said it had been seen by at least 4 members of his team over the years, each one seeing it independently before they compared notes. He said none of them had ever seen it move. He said one of his team members, a man named Birch who had since died of cancer, claimed he had once found tracks on a ridge where the figure had been standing. He said Birch described them as approximately human in shape but too large and too deep for any human being, with an unusual spacing between the ball of the foot and the toes that he had not seen in any human or animal track before or since. He said Birch made a plaster cast of one of the tracks and kept it for years and then one day threw it in the river because looking at it bothered him. He said he wished Birch had not done that. Pete told me something else. He said in his 30 years of searching those mountains he had noticed a pattern that he had never found an explanation for. He said that on operations where the figure appeared, the survival rate of the person they were searching for was measurably lower. Not dramatically lower, not so dramatically that a statistician would call it significant without a much larger data set, but lower. He said he had gone back through 30 years of his records and on the operations where he or another team member had reported the figure, the person was found alive approximately 40% of the time. On operations with no figure sighting, the survival rate was closer to 65%. He said this could be coincidence. He said the figure appeared more often on the most difficult operations, the ones with bad weather or difficult terrain, and those were also the operations with the lowest survival rates, so the correlation might be explained by the difficulty of the operation rather than anything the figure itself was doing. He said he preferred to believe that because the alternative was to believe that the thing on the ridge had some influence over the outcome, and he did not want to believe that while he still had to go out and search those mountains. I thought about what Pete said for a long time. I went back through my own log, my 43 entries. I went through my official records. I cross-referenced them. The numbers I found were similar to Pete's. On operations where I had logged a figure sighting, the person we were searching for was found alive in 38% of cases. On operations with no sighting, 59%. I sat with that for a long time. I am sitting with it still. Raina told me, when she described what she had been seeing for 2 years, that on one occasion she had tried to photograph it. She had her phone out, and she raised it and pointed it at the ridge and looked at the screen. The figure was not on the screen. She could see it with her eyes, standing clear against the sky on the ridge above her, but the phone camera showed only the ridge and the trees and the empty sky. She lowered the phone and there it was, visible, present, standing still. She raised the phone again. Nothing on the screen. She stood there alternating between looking with her eyes and looking through the camera for about 2 minutes, and every time the same result, visible to direct observation and absent from the camera's sensor. She said it was the most frightening thing she had experienced in 2 years of seeing it, more frightening than the seeing itself, because it implied something about the nature of the thing that she did not want to think about. I had been doing this work for 16 years and I intend to keep doing it. People go missing in those mountains and some of them are found and brought home and some of them are not, and the work matters regardless of what is watching from the ridges. I am not going to stop because something stands above me while I search and watches with whatever it uses to watch with and cannot be photographed, and leaves tracks that disturb the people who see them. I am going to keep going out and I am going to keep doing my job and I am going to keep looking up at the ridgelines and noting in my private log when it is there, and when it is not, and what the outcome of the search is. But I am writing this down because people should know. The mountains of western North Carolina are beautiful and I love them, and they are also home to something that I cannot explain or categorize or account for, and that has been watching human beings in distress for longer than anyone knows. It does not interfere. It does not help. It stands on ridges above the lost and the searching alike, and it watches with the patience of something very old and very still, and then it is gone. And sometimes the person we were looking for is found and sometimes they are not, and I do not know what it wants, and I do not know what it is, and I have been carrying that not knowing for 11 years and the weight of it is considerable. Raina asked me, in the truck in the parking lot, whether I thought it had always been there or whether it was something new. I told her the Cherokee called it the Ridgewalker in some of the oldest accounts, and the first white settlers in those mountains had their own names for it, and Pete Sorrells had been seeing it for 30 years before me, and the plaster cast that Birch made and threw in the river because looking at it bothered him had existed in the world for years before Birch decided it was better not to have it. So no, I said. It is not new. It has been on those ridges for as long as there have been ridges to stand on, and people below worth watching. She asked me if that made it better or worse. I said I did not know. She nodded and looked out the windshield at the mountains in the distance, the blue ridge of them against the sky, and neither of us said anything for a long time. The next search is on Saturday. I will look up. If it is there, I will write it down. If it is not there, I will be relieved in a way that does not fully relieve anything. I will find the person or I will not find the person, and I will come home and sit at this desk and think about the thing on the ridge, and what it wants from us, what it has always wanted, what it finds in the endless patient watching of human beings in distress that keeps it coming back to those ridges year after year, decade after decade, century after century. I do not have an answer. I have only the log. 43 entries and counting.